For over 100 days, nobody said it. Not the FBI, not the sheriff, not a single anchor on a single broadcast, not one of the thousands of voices that have spent more than 3 months covering every visible detail of this case. The public version of this investigation stayed inside one lane. Nancy Guthrie is missing. The investigation is active. Do not give up hope. We are getting closer. That is what law enforcement said. That is what the media repeated. And then this week, a retired FBI supervisory special agent who spent 22 years working violent crimes inside the Bureau looked at the same evidence that everyone else has been looking at for over 100 days and said 3 words that nobody in any official or semi-official capacity had been willing to say out loud. She said, "I think she passed." Those 3 words from a trained investigator are not the end of this video. They are the beginning. Because what matters more than the conclusion is the reasoning. How a woman who spent over 2 decades building violent crime cases inside the FBI looked at the blood pattern on a front porch, a 16-minute window in the early hours of February 1st, and the specific silence that has surrounded this case since the ransom note stopped, and arrived at an assessment that is going to be the hardest and most important thing said about this case since the doorbell footage was released. Before we go any further, I need to say this clearly because it matters enormously. Law enforcement has not declared Nancy Guthrie dead. The Guthrie family has not declared Nancy dead. Jennifer Coffindaffer is not part of the official investigation. Everything she has said is expert analysis based on publicly available information, not confirmed fact, not law enforcement intelligence, not inside knowledge. We are going to treat it as what it is, the professional assessment of a credentialed investigator that deserves to be heard honestly and examined carefully. If you are watching this and holding on to hope for Nancy, hold on to it. Elizabeth Smart was told she was gone. She was not. Subscribe to Deep Discovered, hit the notification bell, drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from tonight. Now, let us go through this carefully. Jennifer Coffindaffer is not a podcast host with a law enforcement opinion. She is a retired FBI supervisory special agent who spent 22 years working violent crimes inside the Bureau. She worked kidnappings. She has sat inside case rooms that looked exactly like the one working the Nancy Guthrie investigation right now. She is the host of the Break the Case podcast and a frequent contributor to News Nation. She knows what evidence means. She knows what it does not mean. And she knows the difference between a professional assessment and internet speculation. On a recent episode of Hidden Killers Live, she sat with hosts Tony Brisky and Robin Green and worked through the evidence piece by piece. And on May 19th and May 23rd of this year, she posted her full analysis on X, publicly under her own name, with her own credentials attached. When a person with that background says something this significant in this public a forum, those words carry weight that an anonymous account simply cannot. The verified timeline. The 16-minute window. Everything Coffindaffer says begins here, with the verified law enforcement timeline that was released publicly and has never been disputed. Nancy Guthrie arrived home at 9:48 p.m. on January 31st. Her garage door closed at 9:50, confirmed by her smart home system. She was inside. She was safe. At that moment, she had every reason to believe she would wake up the next morning and go to church. Then the house went quiet for hours. At 1:47 a.m., her doorbell camera was disabled, not by a power outage, by a person. A masked, armed, gloved individual who had come prepared with a plan and a piece of vegetation to cover the lens. At 2:12 a.m., a motion sensor inside the property detected movement classified by the system as a person. No video was recorded. The file was either corrupted or never saved. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker application disconnected from her phone. From 1:47 to 2:28 is 41 minutes, from the moment the camera went dark to the moment the device lost its connection. And inside those 41 minutes is a 16-minute window, from 2:12 to 2:28, that Coffindaffer says holds the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie on the night she was taken. What occurred in those 16 minutes? What happened between the motion sensor detecting a presence and the pacemaker going silent? That is the question that nobody has answered publicly, and the blood on the front porch is where the answer begins. The blood, expirated. the distinction that changes everything. When Nancy's family arrived at the house around noon on February 1st, law enforcement found blood drops on the front porch. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that blood was matched through DNA to Nancy Guthrie. The internet saw those drops and immediately concluded savage violence. That framing stuck, and Coffindaffer pushed back on it, not to minimize what happened, but because accuracy matters more than sensation in an active investigation. Here is the context that almost nobody covered properly. Nancy Guthrie was on blood thinners, anticoagulant medication, the kind that makes even a minor scrape bleed far more visibly than it would for a healthy person. A small cut, a fall against a railing, even a hard grab on someone in her condition, any of those can produce visible blood drops on stone without indicating a severe beating. The blood alone cannot tell you how serious the confrontation was without knowing what caused it. But then Coffindaffer went further. She identified something specific in the pattern of that blood that almost nobody has discussed. She described it as expirated, not aspirated. That distinction is everything. Aspirated blood enters the airway from the outside, from an external wound near the face. Expirated blood comes from inside the body, coughed or breathed out through the mouth or nose. It produces a specific pattern, fine, misty, directional, different from dripping blood, different from impact spatter. What Coffindaffer sees in the porch evidence is consistent with expirated blood, blood that originated inside Nancy's body. Whatever happened on those front steps caused internal trauma. Something happened inside her body on that porch that made her bleed from the inside out. And then Jim Clemente, a retired FBI supervisory special agent and behavioral profiler who reviewed the same blood evidence, added the detail that connects directly to Coffindaffer's theory. He studied the pattern of the trail, and he said where the drops stop, where the trail ends, his professional belief is that Nancy was picked up and carried to the vehicle, that someone lifted her and carried her the rest of the way, and that given the nature of the blood and how the pattern terminates, she was either unconscious or barely conscious at that point. Coffindaffer agrees. She believes Nancy was alive when she left that porch. The pacemaker disconnecting at 2:28 confirms it, because a pacemaker does not lose its Bluetooth connection when the person wearing it is already dead. It loses connection when the person moves beyond range of the connected phone. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy Guthrie was alive. She was being moved. She was almost certainly unconscious. The wrench attack, the framework nobody had named. Now let us talk about why Coffindaffer believes this happened, because the motive framework she has introduced is one that has received almost no serious coverage, despite the fact that it describes one of the fastest growing forms of organized crime on the planet right now. She wrote on X on May 19th, "Do you know what a wrench attack is? These are very organized attacks against the rich to extort cryptocurrency via kidnappings and violent home invasions. The puppet masters in these crimes are sophisticated. A wrench ring is an organized criminal network, not a disorganized opportunist, not a local predator who spotted an easy target, an organized network that researches wealthy individuals, people with significant assets, often including cryptocurrency, and plans targeted abductions of those individuals or their family members specifically to extort digital ransoms. The name comes from the premise at the heart of the scheme. You cannot hack a cryptocurrency wallet without the password, but you can take someone the wallet owner loves, and you can make them give you the password to get that person back. Hence the wrench, a physical tool applied to a digital problem. These networks operate through layers of separation. The planners and financiers never appear at the scene. They recruit low-level participants, sometimes through the dark web, sometimes through encrypted messaging apps, sometimes through intermediaries, to do the physical work. Those recruits are given instructions, tools, and a communication method. They execute the operation. The architects behind it profit from a position that law enforcement cannot easily reach. The scale of this industry is not a fringe concern. In 2023, more than $1.25 billion was paid globally in cryptocurrency ransoms. In 2024, $892 million. In 2025, the figure was already approaching $820 million before the year was finished. Coffindaffer is not describing a niche theory. She is describing one of the most financially significant criminal industries in the world right now, and she believes the Guthrie case fits the profile. Savannah Guthrie and her husband Michael Feldman have a combined net worth estimated at over $45 million. High profile, high wealth, the kind of target a wrench ring would spend time researching, the kind of family whose public visibility, photos of Nancy's home, photos of her bedroom, public knowledge of who she is and where she lives, makes the planning phase easier than it would be for a private family. The Scottsdale case, one day before. And then Coffindaffer pointed to something that happened one day before Nancy was taken. January 30th, 2026, Scottsdale, Arizona. 60 miles away, two teenagers from California drove more than 600 miles. They put on FedEx delivery uniforms. They broke into a home belonging to people they had been told owned significant cryptocurrency. They tied the residents up and began demanding access codes. They had been hired through Signal, an encrypted messaging app, by someone they had never met in person, someone who paid them $1,000 up front as seed money and promised substantially more if the operation succeeded. The job failed. A child hiding upstairs called the police. The teenagers were arrested and are now being tried as adults. Coffindaffer was explicit. This Scottsdale case is not confirmed to be connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. She said that directly, but she used it to make a point that matters. These operations are real. They happen in Arizona. They happened the day before Nancy was taken. The recruitment model is real. Anonymous online hiring through encrypted channels, seed money up front, low-level participants who have never met the architects of the scheme. The method is documented. The geography is adjacent. The timeline is one day apart. That does not mean they are connected. It means the type of crime Coffindaffer is describing is not theoretical. It is operational in the same state at the same time. Porch Guy is a mope. The handler is never on camera. Coffindaffer has called Porch Guy a mope from the beginning of her public analysis of this case. In federal law enforcement, a mope is a specific term, a low-level, unsophisticated participant, someone who raises their hand for a job they do not fully understand, someone expendable, someone whose arrest, if it came, would not meaningfully threaten the people above them in the operational structure. Look at the footage, the black ski mask, the reflective strips on the backpack, the gun holster worn at the wrong position on the body, the vegetation stuffed in front of the camera lens, the flashlight held in his mouth while he worked to block the camera with a branch. This is not the entrance of a sophisticated criminal. This is someone who assembled a costume and showed up to do a job he probably did not fully grasp the consequences of. But Coffindaffer makes a critical distinction here that most coverage has missed. She believes Porch Guy was physically alone at the scene, no accomplice standing around the corner, no second masked figure waiting nearby. But he was not operationally alone. Someone was in his ear. Coffindaffer identified what appears to be a walkie-talkie antenna visible in the doorbell footage. Her assessment, he was communicating through a two-way radio device with a handler who was never anywhere near that house, and that handler is why geofencing produced nothing. The FBI used geofencing technology, a method of identifying all mobile devices present in a geographic area during a specific time window. It found no matches that could be linked to the crime. Because Porch Guy and his handler did not use cell phones, they used two-way radios, old technology with no digital signature, no GPS data, nothing for geofencing to catch. Whoever designed this operation understood how law enforcement technology works and specifically planned around the most common methods investigators use to identify suspects after the fact. The plan. What was supposed to happen? Coffindaffer believes she understands what the plan was supposed to be and how it failed. The objective was not chaos. It was a business operation. Subdue Nancy quietly. Get her out through the back exit. The doors had been propped open specifically for this purpose. Place her in a waiting vehicle. Transport her to a holding location, potentially an Airbnb. There are an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 active short-term rental properties within 100 miles of Nancy's home. In documented wrench ring cases, operators have used cash-paid rentals booked under false identities to hold victims while ransom demands are negotiated. No surveillance, no paper trail connecting the property to the network. Hold Nancy, produce proof of life, demand that Savannah transfer cryptocurrency, collect, disappear. The plan had a logic to it. An 84-year-old woman, alone, deaf at night without her hearing aids, cardiac compromised. She was supposed to be the easiest part of this operation. What the plan did not account for was Nancy Guthrie herself. She could not hear him enter. She could not comply with verbal commands. Whatever physical confrontation happened in that bedroom and on those front steps, the blood tells us it happened, was not supposed to happen. The plan required a cooperative, movable target. What Porch Guy found was a woman who fought, an 84-year-old woman in her pajamas who could not hear what was being demanded of her and whose body responded to the threat the only way it knew how. The expirated blood on those steps is evidence of a body under catastrophic physical stress, a heart that was already operating at its limit, being pushed past it. Coffindaffer's assessment is that the fight, combined with Nancy's underlying medical condition, is where the plan collapsed, not because Porch Guy was stopped, because the asset he had come to deliver to a holding location was no longer in the condition the plan required. I think she passed, the hardest honest assessment. This is where Coffindaffer said what nobody else had said. She believes Nancy Guthrie was alive when she left that porch. The pacemaker tells us that. Unconscious, barely breathing, but alive. What she believes happened in the hours that followed is the part that is hardest to say and hardest to hear. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had a pacemaker. She was on critical daily medication that she had not taken. She had just endured a violent physical confrontation in the middle of the night. The Porch Guy who put her in that vehicle was a mope, a recruited operative hired for a job. He was not a medical professional. He was not briefed on her cardiac history. He was told she was elderly and wealthy. He was not told that her heart was already working at the edge of what it could tolerate. Cold case detective Brian Martin put it this way on News Nation. The kidnappers likely thought they would hold her for a day or two, collect the ransom, drop her off somewhere safe. Instead, something went sideways. Her body could not handle what was being done to it, and the people holding her found themselves in a situation they had no contingency plan for. Retired Nassau County Lieutenant Michael Gould stated his professional opinion directly, under a 10% chance Nancy is still alive. He believes she likely died within the first 72 hours. Coffindaffer's assessment on Hidden Killers Live was 3 words: I think she passed. 3 words from a woman who spent 22 years in violent crimes and does not say things like that without reason. The ransom notes reframed. What the silence actually means. Now the ransom notes, because Coffindaffer's theory reframes everything about them. The first note arrived at KOLD-TV, the CBS affiliate in Tucson, on February 2nd, one day after Nancy was taken. It demanded Bitcoin. Set 2 deadlines, February 5th and February 9th. Both deadlines passed. Silence. Then more notes came. Multiple emails sent to 3 different media servers. The FBI has spent over 100 days trying to trace the origin of those emails. They have not been able to. The level of digital sophistication required to send 6 separate communications to 3 different servers without leaving a traceable footprint is far beyond the capabilities of the person who fumbled with a branch on a front porch. This is not Porch Guy's work. This is the handler, the puppet master, the architect who was never on camera and never near that house. Coffindaffer's reading is this. The first 2 notes were real. They came from the actual network behind the abduction. Real demands, real deadlines, a genuine belief that Savannah Guthrie would pay to get her mother back. But after those 2 deadlines passed without payment or contact, Coffindaffer believes the real ransom effort ended. The subsequent notes, the noise that kept arriving, she considers opportunistic. Scammers and fake actors who pile onto high-profile cases the way they always do. Michael Colella, the California man who was federally indicted for sending fraudulent ransom messages to the Guthrie family, is the documented example of that category. Why did the real ransom effort go quiet after those first 2 deadlines? Because there was nothing left to ransom. You cannot demand proof of life you cannot provide. You cannot keep making demands for someone who is no longer alive to speak into a camera. The leverage was gone, the plan was over, and the puppet master, whoever's sitting somewhere far from Tucson with a cryptocurrency wallet and a disappearing act already mapped out, simply closed the channels and went quiet. That silence has lasted more than 100 days. Was Porch Guy eliminated? The final unanswered question. And then Coffindaffer raised the theory that is the hardest to sit with, because it would explain the thing that has puzzled every expert following this case for months. Why has nobody come forward for the reward? $1.2 million is sitting on the table unclaimed. In almost every major criminal case in American history, that kind of money eventually produces someone willing to talk. Nobody has moved on this reward. Coffindaffer has said publicly that she wonders whether Porch Guy himself is still alive. In organized criminal networks that operate the way wrench rings operate, networks that have moved hundreds of millions of dollars in ransoms across multiple years without getting caught, loose ends are a liability. When an operation goes wrong, when it produces the kind of national attention this one produced, the low-level operative who touched the physical scene becomes the only thread connecting the architects to the crime. If that thread is eliminated, the connection is severed. If Porch Guy was removed after the operation failed, that explains the silence in a way that no other theory quite does. Not nobody knows enough to talk, not that the reward is insufficient, but that the person who knows the most is no longer in a position to say anything to anyone. This theory is not confirmed by law enforcement. It has not been validated by the investigation. It is Coffindaffer's professional assessment based on the documented behavioral patterns of organized criminal networks of this type. We are treating it as what it is, one expert's reading of a pattern she has seen before. The 4 scenarios, what Coffindaffer said on May 23rd. On May 23rd, Coffindaffer published a full accounting of the 4 scenarios she considers most likely. The first is the wrench ring attack we have just walked through. The second is a stalking and obsession motive, someone completely fixated on the Guthrie family who targeted Nancy specifically to cause maximum suffering to those who love her. The third is a handyman or family friend, someone with legitimate prior access to the property who used that access to plan and execute the abduction. She referenced the Hetty Braun case as a comparable, a kidnapping for ransom where demands were made 1 day later, $3 million demanded, and the victim was found alive, shackled in a trailer in sub-zero temperatures, approximately 4 days after being taken. Nancy's case, $6 million demanded, 1 day later. The parallel is specific and deliberately drawn. The fourth scenario is a revenge plot. Someone angry at Nancy or a Guthrie family member who carried out this crime, not for financial gain, but to cause absolute misery. Someone who would risk everything to destroy a family's peace permanently. She labeled it as the darkest of the 4 possibilities, a crime committed not for leverage but for damage. I am going to say clearly that none of these 4 scenarios has been confirmed by law enforcement. Coffindaffer is not part of the official investigation. She has said that herself. But she has been following this case closely for nearly 4 months with the eye of someone who spent 22 years inside the Bureau, and her 4 scenarios cover the realistic range of what this could be more comprehensively than anything else published in one place. The honest close, what we hold and what we do not know. I want to close this video by saying something directly. Coffindaffer said, "I think she passed." Morgan Wright said, "Nobody homicide." Michael Gould said, "Under 10% chance." These are trained professionals reading evidence the way they were trained to read it. Their assessments deserve to be heard, but law enforcement has not confirmed any of this. The Guthrie family has not given up, and there are people like Elizabeth Smart, who survived her own abduction when every expert gave her similar odds, who have said publicly that Nancy could still be alive and that hope is worth holding. Both of those things can exist at the same time. The honest position at day 115 is that we do not know. What we know is the evidence is real, the blood is real, the 16-minute window is real, the pacemaker timestamp is real, the ransom silence is real, the geofencing found nothing because radio technology left nothing to find, and somewhere a strand of hair is in a laboratory at Quantico being processed by the most advanced forensic genealogy technology that exists. When that work produces a result, and if the science holds, it will produce a result, the name at the end of that family tree will be connected to a network that the FBI has been building a case around for over 100 days. That is the reality of where this investigation stands, and Nancy Guthrie deserves every day of that work. If you have any information, anything at all, tips.fbi.gov, 1-800-CALL-FBI. The reward is real. The investigation is active. Leave a comment. Tell me which of Coffindaffer's 4 scenarios you think fits the evidence most closely. Tell me what part of this analysis changed how you see this case. Tell me where in the world you are watching from tonight. And if you are new to Deep Discovered, subscribe. We do not stop until there is somewhere to stop. I will see you in the next update.